Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one-stop solution for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. Let's start the discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 10 important articles for a detailed analysis so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. We have four topics that are important for both prelims and mains. So we will carry out a detailed discussion of these topics, and we will also cover six small articles which are important only for the prelims exam. So before we start the discussion, I have a very important announcement. Now you can avail Unacademy's IAS courses with a 25% discount, and this limited offer is ending tomorrow. So those interested can avail this special offer period to enroll into our IAS courses at the cheapest price possible, especially if you're preparing for 2027 prelims. Now you have a 18-month window to start your preparation with India's top educators. So the 18-month subscription, as you can see here, would be available at just 25,499. And to avail this offer, you have to enter the code IAS English. So those interested, please click on the link provided in the description and enter the code IAS English to avail this offer. And we've also launched another batch of our Platinum program. Platinum is one of the most premium online courses in the country where there is a two-way interaction between the educator and the students, where the students have to keep their cameras on so the teachers can take a look at your attentiveness in the class, hold you accountable in the class, and provide for better doubt resolution. So if you're someone who wants hand holding and mentorship from your teachers, then Platinum is the right program for you. So all these courses would be available with a 25% discount. And if you want the PDF of the session, please join our official Telegram channel. After the session ends, we will be sharing the PDF over here. So let's get started and look at the first article. On page number 6, there's a column written by M.A. Baby, a well known communist leader, who's talking about the office of the governor, the role and functions of the governor, and how was this office envisaged in our constitution by the Constituent Assembly. See, this discussion is in the news because a constitution bench of the Supreme Court, a five-judge constitution bench of the Supreme Court, which had taken up the 16th presidential reference under Article 143, where the president had referred the matter to the Supreme Court, asking for Supreme Court's legal and constitutional advisory opinion. The Supreme Court has passed this ruling that no timeline can be prescribed on the governor and the president when it comes to granting assent to bills passed by state assemblies, and if they've been reserved for the consideration of the president as per the provisions of Article 200 and Article 201. Because previously the Supreme Court had held that governors don't have this discretionary power to delay the bills deliberately, and it had tried imposing a timeline within which the governor and the president had to grant their assent. Or else, the Supreme Court had ruled that deemed assent would be granted to these bills, meaning automatically the bills would become a law once the timeline would expire. So the Supreme Court has reversed this ruling. The five-judge constitution bench, which took up the presidential reference, it has seen this as a possible judicial overreach, that the judiciary can't place timelines on high constitutional offices like the governor's office and the president. And it has essentially rolled back this particular decision. So, in this context, the writer is examining the role of the governor, the functions of the office of the governor, as it was envisaged by our constitution makers. What were the debates in the Constituent Assembly? What was the opinion of Dr. B.R. Ambedkar and other key members of the Constituent Assembly when it came to the role and functions of the office of governor? And how does it contrast with current times, where there are allegations that the office of the governor is blatantly misused by the ruling party at the center to target opposition ruled states? So let's explore this debate and let's dive a little deep into this topic. See, when the Constituent Assembly was debating about the role and functions and office of the governor, there were a lot of concerns that had been expressed by the members of the Constituent Assembly, especially the fact that governor would be nominated by the center. So many members had flagged that when an unelected constitutional authority who's nominated by the center, and if in the ranking order, if this office has some sort of superintendence over, let's say, the chief minister, the state cabinet, and the elected assembly, there was a fear that this could undermine the elected at the state level, the elected state assembly, the elected ministers who are part of the state cabinet, the chief minister, the elected members at the state level. There was a concern that they would be undermined by a unelected nominee of the center. Now you need to know where these fears came from. The fear that a governor as a nominee could dominate over a elected state government. It comes directly from the Government of India Act 1935. Because in this British era law, there was a similar provision that provided for provincial governors who were appointed by the viceroy, and they acted as the nominees of viceroy at the provincial level. These provincial governors were given tremendous powers. They were basically acting as agents of the Viceroy of India on behalf of the British Crown. And thus, they were directly interfering with the provincial governments and undermining the authority of the provincial elected assemblies. So many members of the Constituent Assembly in 1947, 48, and 49, when the debates were taking place, they brought up this concern that whether this office of governor, which is being envisaged in our constitution, would it be like the provincial governors of the Government of India Act 1935? Would they be similar to the nominees of the viceroy, constantly meddling in provincial matters, undermining the autonomy and the powers that are allocated to the provincial level? So, to these concerns, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had a clear reply. Dr. Ambedkar has made several references during the debates in the Constituent Assembly, pointing out that the office of the governor is purely a nominal authority. It's just a ceremonial position with no independent powers ascribed to this office. Though it is a high constitutional office, it is meant to act as just a bridge between the center and the state. It is meant to just facilitate smooth functioning of center state relations. So the governor per se will not have any exclusive powers as such, apart from limited discretionary powers which are clearly mentioned in the constitution. Dr. Ambedkar was clearly of the opinion that governor's office is never supposed to be an authority which can interfere with the elected state government and the state assembly. Now, for example, if you look at the power of the governor when it comes to appointing the chief minister of a state after fresh elections have taken place, or the role of the governor when there is a hung assembly to invite the leader of the single largest party to stake their claim to form the government, or be it during a no confidence motion when the stability of the government is in question. In these matters, the governor does have some limited discretion. But according to Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, this discretion is well defined in the constitution, meaning the governor cannot go beyond this. When it comes to the laws being enacted by the state assembly, the bills which are being passed, constituent assembly members such as N.G. Ranga, a very well known jurist and a legal expert who was part of the constituent assembly, then even Rukmini Chaudhary, who played an important role in the constituent assembly, they raised serious concerns about an unelected governor, a nominee of the center, being given with this power which could basically affect the powers of the elected assembly to pass laws. They raised questions about this, and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had a reply to this as well. That governor's office is not being provided with wide discretion, even when it comes to passage of bills, and the role of the governor in granting assent or withholding assent or reserving the bill for the consideration of the president is very limited, very clearly specified in the constitution. The governor can reserve the bill for the consideration of the president only if that particular bill contradicts a central law, or if it fundamentally alters aspects of the constitution, something related to fundamental rights, or if it were to usurp the powers of the center or contradict laws of the center. Only in those specific matters, the governor was given the authority to reserve the bills for the consideration of the president. So Dr. Ambedkar kept on assuring the Constituent Assembly that this office is a nominal office, a ceremonial office. He even joked about this office. He said, nobody would even want to be the governor because this office has no power, no authority. It is just supposed to be a link. But today, when you look at how the governors in some states are exercising their powers and allegedly misusing their discretion, it raises questions about the constitution itself. This reminds me of a very profound statement that was made by India's former president, K.R. Narayanan, when India was marking the 50th anniversary of becoming a republic. K.R. Narayanan, the then president, he had said that has the constitution failed us, or is it we who are failing the constitution? A very profound question that the former president was asking. Has the constitution failed the Indian Republic? Are there major flaws in the constitution itself which is affecting us? Or is it the current generation who are supposed to work the constitution, who are supposed to protect and implement the constitution? Is it we who are failing the constitution? This is exactly what Dr. B.R. Ambedkar also had said. Dr. Ambedkar was of the view that no matter how good your constitution is, eventually it depends on the men, right, who are called upon to implement it, who are called upon to work the constitution. So today, if you see how the office of the governor has been misused, not just by the current ruling dispensation at the center, even previously, we have seen ruling parties at the center constantly abusing and misusing the office of the governor, be it under the Congress, the BJP, the coalition governments. Throughout India's independent history, the office of the governor has been repeatedly misused, mainly to target opposition ruled states. So, when you look at governors like R.N. Ravi, the way in which R.N. Ravi has tried blocking the bills passed by the Tamil Nadu State Assembly, or other governors who have held on to key decisions with regard to, let's say, appointment of vice chancellors to universities. So, this is where governors are stepping out of the domain that was given to them by the Constitution. They are basically entering into an uncharted territory, which was never conceived by the Constitution makers. So, the writer says that the Supreme Court has failed the Constitution by not imposing the timeline on governors and presidents. The Constitution clearly states when the bill is reserved by the governor for the consideration of the president under provisions of Article 200 and 201, the assent should be granted as soon as possible. But in the current case, governors and the center, they have made it as late as possible. They will try to hold on to the assent as much as possible till the last minute, pushing it for several months. And this directly erodes the authority of an elected assembly, or elected state government. It reminds us of another profound statement: the tyranny of the unelected over the elected. The governor is an unelected office, a nominal ceremonial position, eroding the authority of an elected legislature and an elected state government. So, your constitution may not be the perfect. It may be impossible to create a perfect constitution. But if the men who are called upon to work the constitution have the right intent, then the constitution would be the most appropriate. But if there is a malified intent, then even the best constitution can be corrupted, can be eroded, can be misused. So the writer is basically highlighting this lost opportunity. The Supreme Court could have used this opportunity to impose strict timelines on the granting of assent to bills passed by state assembly, which could have protected the center state balance, and it could have limited the discretion that governor's office is today enjoying. This was not envisaged by our constitution makers. The kind of misuse of the governor's office that you have seen was not envisaged by the constitution makers, and that becomes very clear when you look at the debates in the Constituent Assembly, when you look at the replies provided by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar when these concerns were expressed by the members. So that is what we learn from this important article. Now take up this practice question. The discussion on the power of governors is even more relevant today in the context of past debates in the Constituent Assembly. Elucidate. So you basically have to link the current controversy that you're seeing with regard to the office of the governor, the presidential reference, the observations of the Supreme Court. How does it connect with the debates in the Constituent Assembly? When similar concerns were raised, what was the discussion? What was the vision of our constitution makers? And how far has the office of the governor deviated from that vision of our founding fathers? So that has to be the focus of your discussion. So use the points you have discussed and try to write a good answer. Now let's move on to the next topic. It's again related to center state relations, but in the domain of disaster management and disaster funding. This article is focused on disaster financing in India and the center state issues that are propping up with regard to disaster financing. Now, first, let's start with an example. See, the state of Kerala was hit by devastating landslides in the Wayanad region. I'm sure all of you remember this. Following the Wayanad landslides, Kerala had estimated major economic losses to the tune of 1,200 crores. Plus, Kerala needed additional funds for rehabilitating the affected people and to reconstruct the damage that had been caused. So it had demanded additional funds to the tune of 2,200 crores from the central government. You know how much the center has approved? The center has approved 260 crores. This is hardly 11% of what Kerala had demanded. Kerala had asked for 2,200 crores in additional disaster financing. The center approved only 11% of it, providing additional funding of 260 crores to Kerala. Now, states like Kerala and Tamil Nadu and other opposition ruled states, they have a grievance here as well. They complain that states such as Bihar, states such as Assam, even Himachal Pradesh, Uttarakhand, which are also affected by disasters, they have been receiving a higher share of disaster financing, whereas opposition ruled states apparently are being discriminated. That is the allegation by opposition ruled states. Now, to understand this, first we need to take a look at disaster financing mechanisms in the country. What's the legal and institutional mechanism that we have for disaster funding? If you look at the Disaster Management Act of 2005, the DM Act, it is this law passed by the then UPA government which created an institutional structure, a legal framework for disaster management and response in the country. Under this law, there are two types of disaster funds which are created. We have the Disaster Response Fund at the national and state level, what we call as NDRF and SDRF. Please be careful. This is not a reference to your disaster response force. That NDRF is different. The National Disaster Response Force and the state disaster response forces, which are set up through the law, right? The NDRF functions under the National Disaster Management Authority, and the SDRFs function under the State Disaster Management Authority. These disaster response forces are different. These are specialist disaster response forces which provide search and rescue operations. They assist the people who are affected by disaster, deliver them aid and assistance. So the same law creates a funding mechanism, just like establishing dedicated response forces. It also establishes dedicated funds, NDRF and SDRF, National Disaster Response Fund, State Disaster Response Fund. It also provides for a mitigation fund, the second type of fund I was talking about, the National Disaster Mitigation Fund, State Level Disaster Mitigation Fund. So these are the funding mechanisms conceived by the Disaster Management Act. Now, the funding with regard to response. These funds are meant to be used for providing immediate relief. That's why it's called a response fund. That is, when a disaster is about to occur or when a disaster has just occurred, there is a need for urgent funding, immediate financing, so that you can incur the cost for providing aid and assistance. You can provide some immediate compensation to the victims who are injured, who have lost their lives, whose houses have been uprooted. So, to provide such immediate help and assistance, response fund is conceptualized. Is that clear? Whereas a mitigation fund is for long term planning, it's for preparedness measures, it's for long term reconstruction measures. That is to mitigate the impact of a disaster. So, providing funds for, let's say, some structural um, mechanisms to be created, like building a cyclone shelter, creating these barriers to hold flood waters, or building a barrier wall to contain landslides, investing in better early warning forecasting systems, or focusing on the long term recovery and reconstruction of a disaster hit area. These are long term mitigation efforts to minimize the impact of a disaster. So that requires a separate fund, which is the mitigation fund. Until recently, we had only one fund which was set up, which was made functional, which was the response fund. The NDRF and SDRF had been set up and made operational since the law was passed. But mitigation fund has been recently set up. The National Disaster Mitigation Fund has been recently set up for mitigation efforts. Now, what is the contribution of the center and the states? When can states request center for additional funding? Let's understand these two important points. When you look at NDRF and SDRF, in SDRF, there is a funding ratio 75 is to 25 or 90 is to 10, where center will contribute 75% of the funds, states will contribute 25% of the funds into the SDRF. Now, this is for your regular states. But states which are more vulnerable, the Himalayan states, northeastern states, they get funding in the ratio of 90 is to 10, where center provides 90% of the funds into SDRF and the states will arrange the remaining 10%. So here the center is already making a contribution to ensure that states have adequate financial resources to provide for immediate relief and response. Now, to complement the SDRF, there is a National Disaster Response Fund, which is 100% funded by the center. So, when a disaster occurs, you know who has the primary responsibility to provide disaster response? It is your state government. Your state government is the concerned authority to provide for immediate disaster response. The center will only complement the state efforts and the state's resources. So, arranging immediate search and rescue operations, providing aid and assistance, dispatching some compensation to the victims, giving food, medical aid, and other supplies. This primary responsibility is with your state government to arrange for disaster response. So, states will withdraw funds from the SDRF. Center has already made a contribution here. States also have made a contribution. So, states will withdraw funds from SDRF to finance any disaster response measures, be it for earthquakes, be it for floods, be it for cyclones, For any disaster, state governments have the primary responsibility here. The center will only complement the state. But SDRF funds are obviously limited. Even though center has given 75% of the share or 90% in some states, remaining funds have been raised with the state. Funds in SDRF would be limited. But there are some states which are extremely vulnerable, extremely prone to different hazards, like Odisha, Jammu and Kashmir, Uttarakhand, Sikkim, Kerala. These are some of the most disaster prone states, regions in the country. So, in a year, they might be hit with multiple disasters and they may not have enough financial capability to cope with the losses. So, states can demand additional funding from the NDRF. The NDRF fund is kept as a standby fund. It is something the center maintains with 100% central funding, and states can request additional funding from the NDRF. But for NDRF funds to be released into SDRF, the disaster should be categorized as a severe disaster. But this is where the problem lies. The Disaster Management Act does not categorize as to what qualifies to be labeled as a severe disaster. There is no standard definition. There is no objective way of defining what is a severe disaster. Now, this is left to the discretion of the center. Now, let me explain the process, how it works with regard to seeking additional funds from the center. Now, let's take Kerala, for example. Let's say the state government feels overwhelmed by multiple disasters and it feels it is running out of financial resources in the SDRF. Now, Kerala can raise a memorandum, a request to the central government, submit a memorandum with some proof and evidence that, look, this is the losses we have suffered. We are not able to cope with this disaster. So we are requesting additional funds from NDRF. Now, the center, that is essentially the Home Ministry, which is the nodal ministry for disaster management, it will set up an inter-ministerial committee. It will draw senior officials, senior bureaucrats from concerned ministries, from finance ministry and the related ministries, depending on the disaster. And it will dispatch an interministerial committee to examine the ground conditions at the state level. Let's say floods have occurred, landslides have occurred. So this central team of officials are sent to the affected state to go and carry out a ground assessment, a ground survey. So they will submit a report to the government of India, recommending whether additional funds are needed or not. Now, based on the recommendations of this interministerial committee, and finally, the political considerations of the political leadership of the central government, they may or may not release additional funds to the state. This is left to the discretion of the center. So it depends on the recommendations of the officials, the interministerial committee which carried out the assessment. And finally, it is a political call, right? At the highest level of the political leadership, the central government has to decide whether additional funds have to be given or not. So this is left to the discretion of the center. Now, the concern here is that there is over centralization of disaster financing, meaning the central government has a higher degree of power and control when it comes to releasing these funds. Because please understand, center is not doing charity to the states by releasing these funds for disaster response. This is the duty of the center. The center is bound to meet these needs of the state governments. So there has to be an appropriate formula based on which these requests by the states are considered and handled. The problem is there is no objectivity. This is the fundamental problem. There is a lot of scope for discretion, which can obviously be misused for political reasons, where the center might be incentivized to provide more funds for states where the same party is in power and deliberately hold back funds for opposition ruled states. This is the allegation which comes up. Now, when you look at other countries, when you look at their disaster financing models, they don't have this discretion. They have built a very objective model based on data, based on parameters. Automatic release of funds will take place in some countries which have better disaster management models than India. Take, for example, United States, even Mexico, then even Australia, Philippines. Many of these countries, they have identified few objective parameters based on which automatic release of funds will take place. Let's say rainfall intensity has crossed a certain threshold. Automatically, federal funds will be released to the state level. Or let's say floods have been reported, or an earthquake of a certain magnitude has hit a particular region. Without waiting for further assessment or further data, automatic fund release is provided in many countries. So there is no scope for subjectivity, no scope for discretion. Depending on the number of deaths being reported, number of deaths per million, this is another objective parameter. Depending on this, automatic funds are released without discretion of the federal government in many of these countries, in Japan as well, in some African countries, in Caribbean nations as well. It is the same model which is followed, where the center cannot hold the states hostage. There's no scope for discretion. There is an automatic criteria. The moment these criteria are met, the parameters are hit during a disaster, there should be an automatic release of funds without any discretion given to the political leadership. That's what many countries have done. That's why their disaster response is much more efficient. In India, the release of funds is highly procedural. There's a lot of red tapeism involved. First, states have to submit a memorandum. Then MHA will send an interministerial committee for assessment. They will conduct a ground survey, go back and submit a report. Then the MHA will consider the report and it is discussed with the cabinet. And finally, it is approved or disapproved by the central government. So there are a lot of procedures, lot of approvals which are needed. It's very bureaucratic in nature that delays the release of the funds. It also gives scope for more discretion, more subjectivity, and sometimes based on political grounds. So what India needs is an objective framework based on parameters where the discretion of the center is reduced. The Disaster Management Act should define what qualifies to be labeled as a severe disaster. The law does not define what is a severe disaster. It is done on a case to case basis, on an individual basis. So we need to identify those parameters to recognize a severe disaster and ensure automatic release of funds. See, this is where Finance Commission has a role to play. Finance Commission is using geographical area and population as criterias for deciding the disbursement of funds. Now, this is where the problem lies. This will end up benefiting the larger states with a larger area, with larger population, right? So those states which are bigger in dimension, which have a bigger population, end up getting more allocation based on the Finance Commission recommendations. But states which are actually more vulnerable, a state like Kerala, for example, it's neither having a large geographical area, neither does it have a large population compared to other states. But Kerala is extremely vulnerable to disasters. It is prone to heavy rainfall, cloudbursts, floods, flash floods, and landslides, and even the impact of cyclones. It is prone to so many hazards, and yet the funding it receives is based on the it is essentially based on the political considerations that comes into picture. It is based on the final decision of the central government. If it has to ask for additional funds from NDRF, it is completely left to the discretion of the center. So right now, the 16th Finance Commission has an opportunity because the 16th Finance Commission has been given terms of reference to deal with disaster management funding, to come up with a formula to streamline disaster financing in the country. So the writer is hoping that in the report that 16th Finance Commission has submitted to the president, hopefully the right recommendations are provided to streamline disaster financing and to minimize the centralizing authority of the central government. Because center is not doing any charity by granting these funds to the states. The funds belong to the states eventually. States have a right to ask for additional funds, but the distribution should be fair. It should be equitable. It should be based on establish data regarding the disasters that are occurring. So this is where the writer is asking for an overhaul of the disaster financing framework in the country. So we should look out for the report of the 16th Finance Commission. Once the details come out, right, once it is approved with the government, we'll get a clear idea as to what is the formula the 16th Finance Commission has recommended for distributing the disaster funds. So please take up this practice question based on what we have discussed. Now, coming to the next article, there's an editorial on page number 6 related to the rising geopolitical tensions between China and Japan. Now, this is a topic we have been discussing over the last couple of weeks. I've already given you at least a basic idea regarding what's happening between China and Japan in the previous sessions. So I'll not take much of your time, but I want you to pay attention to this development. What's happening in East Asia is extremely concerning, especially since the election of a new Japanese Prime Minister, Sane Takaichi. Sane Takaichi is a far right-wing nationalist leader. After many, many decades, Japan has got a far right-wing leader. Now, this is a matter of concern for the region and the entire world because Japan had a notorious image when it was ruled by the far right-wing elements. If you think of Japan during the World War era, if you think of Imperial Japan, the atrocities that Japan committed, the fascist rise of the Japanese Empire, and the kind of brutality they showed across Asia is something that is hated even to this day. Japan joining the Axis powers with Hitler's Nazi Germany, Italy's Mussolini, right? And the horrors that Japanese soldiers committed across Asia is something that people remember to this day. So the rise of a far right-wing ultra nationalist leader and the statement she has been making has triggered a lot of concern. So Sane Takaichi recently said that if China were to invade Taiwan, if China were to invade Taiwan, as China keeps repeating this claim, Japan's prime minister said, then this would be a security threat for Japan. This was her public statement that if China were to invade Taiwan, then Japan will be forced to treat this as a national security threat. So, what does this mean? It means that Japan could possibly intervene. If at all China were to invade Taiwan, to annex Taiwan, then Japan is sending out a signal that we will treat this as a national security threat, meaning we might intervene. So, this statement was seen as a provocative statement by the Chinese leadership. And you all know how China is. China is a very sensitive, insecure, and a very aggressive power. Under Xi Jinping, China has become all the more aggressive in the Indo-Pacific. It does not tolerate any kind of intervention from outside powers like US or Australia or Japan, or even for that matter from India. So China has reacted very aggressively to this particular statement. According to reports, Japan has deployed a medium range missile unit to an island close to Taiwan, the Yonaguni Island, which I showed you in the map yesterday. I showed you the map of this island as well. It's located hardly 110 kilometers from Taiwan. So, according to reports, Japan has moved an advanced medium range missile unit to the Yonaguni Island. And China has countered this by stepping up its aggressive military patrols across the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwan Strait is one of the hotly contested regions where the Chinese PLA Navy and the Chinese Coast Guard and the PLA Air Force, they are super aggressive in the Taiwan Strait and they deter any kind of foreign presence, especially when US and its allies like European powers, NATO allies, Australia, Japan, South Korea, when they try to deploy their ships or aircraft here, China reacts very violently and even tries to disrupt their freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight. So this often leads to immediate escalations, which could easily spill over and turn into a bigger conflict. Now the question is, why does China claim Taiwan? And what's the international position over Taiwan? Is Japan right in trying to interfere with regard to the issue between China and Taiwan? See, this story goes back to the Chinese Revolution of 1940s, when a conflict had broken out between the Communist Party of China, which is the current party in power, and the nationalist KMT, the Kuomintang Party, under Chiang Kai shek. So the Communist Party, led by Mao Zedong, was locked in a state of civil war with the Kuomintang, or the KMT, under Chiang Kai shek, which ruled the then mainland of China, the then Republic of China, also known as ROC. So eventually, the communists won the civil war. Mao Zedong's Communist Party defeated the Kuomintang, and the KMT, that is the Republic of China under Chiang Kai shek, they retreated to Taiwan. They retreated to Taiwan, and thus there were two Chinas at one point. The Communist Party, which captured authority and power in mainland China, would establish the PRC that we all know today, the People's Republic of China, formed in 1949. And Taiwan ruled as a separate entity by the KMT, which was Republic of China, and later it transitioned into a democracy. So today, Taiwan is a democracy, a self-governing island territory, and it's a democratic state. But most countries in the world do not recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation. Why? Because most countries have accepted the one China policy, including the US, even India. Most of the countries in the world have accepted one China policy, meaning there's only one Chinese state, which is the PRC, the People's Republic of China. PRC's claim is that someday they will annex Taiwan. They will integrate Taiwan into China's sovereignty. So they don't look at Taiwan as an independent territory. And China has plans to eventually annex Taiwan and merge Taiwan into its territory. And most countries accept this position. Most of the countries do not have official diplomatic ties with Taiwan. Even India does not have official diplomatic relations with Taiwan. We only have limited cultural and economic ties, but we don't have full-fledged diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And China is very sensitive about this, very aggressive about this. So US has maintained a deliberate position on the Taiwan issue, though it has accepted one China policy. It has supplied weapons to Taiwan. It has directly deployed its military assets in the region, including its warships and aircraft. It has supplied missiles and advanced weaponry to Taiwan. And every time US makes an interference here, China reacts even more violently, leading to tensions in the Taiwan Strait. US has been deliberately poking China as well. So it's part of the larger global rivalry, the geopolitical rivalry between US and China. Now, for Japan to take the same position and to get aggressive against China could be a recipe for disaster in this region, because China Japan already have standing disputes. In East China Sea, in the same region, we have the Senkaku Islands, also called as the Diaoyu Islands, which is Japanese territory claimed by China. So they have a standing maritime territorial dispute, and both sides have resorted to aggression. Especially China has been super aggressive. It has been violating the international rules laid down under the UN Convention on Law of the Sea. It's disrupting peace and stability in the region. It has used aggressive military maneuvers to block freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight of foreign vessels and aircraft. So at this point, for Japan to get counter aggressive and to make such irresponsible statements, it's like adding fuel to the fire. And one mistake from either side could easily turn this into a bigger conflict, a bigger war could possibly break out over the Taiwan issue. So, this is where the US has to play a more responsible role, according to the editorial. The US has to bring pressure on Japan to tone down its rhetoric. There should be international pressure on China to ensure China follows the international rules, because China is blatantly violating the rules based order. So there has to be that global pressure on China to behave according to international rules and respect the laid down rules based order. And US also should act on Japan, and Japan should also take a step back. because the tensions in the last 2-3 weeks is quite alarming. And as I said, one miscalculation is enough to trigger a bigger war, a conflict in this region. And the last thing the world needs right now is another conflict. Now, coming to the next topic, on page 11, there are two articles related to the RBI, the Reserve Bank of India. So let's look at the first article. RBI has issued 244 consolidated master directives to replace 9,000 plus directives and regulatory guidelines that had been issued over the decades. I hope you know RBI is a regulator. It's a master regulator of the banking sector. It regulates different types of entities. 11 types of regulated entities come under the jurisdiction of the Reserve Bank of India. This includes your commercial banks, regional rural banks, your rural and urban cooperative banks, your NBFCs, non-banking finance companies, then the credit information companies, right? So like this, there are a total of 11 regulated entities that come under the jurisdiction of the RBI. The small finance banks, the payment banks as well, right? So over the decades, as RBI has been governing them, regulating them, it has issued thousands and thousands of directives, guidelines, and orders. It has led to some overlapping orders. It has led to more confusion as well. Most of the orders and directives are not followed properly. So to streamline this, RBI has reviewed all these past directives and regulations, and now it has streamlined them and brought out 244 consolidated master directives to make it easier for compliance, to make it easier for enforcement, and ensure that these regulations are effectively implemented on the ground. So these regulations are overseen by the Department of Regulation within the RBI. There is a dedicated department within the RBI, the Department of Regulation, which ensures that all the banks and regulated entities, they comply with these guidelines of the RBI. So this will simplify RBI's regulation in the country for the banking sector. In prelims, there can be a question on the regulated entities. There are 11 regulated entities. Please make a note. Commercial banks, small finance banks, payment banks, your local area banks, RRBs, then urban and rural cooperative banks, all India financial institutions, NBFCs, asset reconstruction companies, which restructure the failed loans or the non performing assets, and finally, credit information companies. These are the 11 type of entities in the banking and credit sector which are regulated by the RBI. Next, RBI has issued final norms for governing digital banking channels. It has come out with a final set of norms to regulate digital banking in the country. So, according to the norms, those providing digital banking services, now they come under these new obligations. It's a refinement of the existing guidelines, and it ensures better service for the customer. It ensures that transaction risk is minimized. It will ensure better KYC procedures are implemented. It will improve the overall service experience for the customer, reduce the cost of transactions through digital banking routes. It will bring in greater compliance. So these new guidelines for digital banking, it can actually have a very positive effect. It has to be implemented by those providing digital banking services. So it will ensure, for example, that these entities have to obtain your consent before you're registered as a customer with these digital banking services. The concept of consent, right to informed consent, which is essential for data privacy, is being introduced through these banking rules for digital banking. So, to onboard a customer, they have to first obtain informed consent of the customer. The customer should know what data is being captured, what kind of oversight and surveillance and monitoring will the bank maintain, and the customer has to give consent. Then for KYC purposes, certain data collection is authorized through these new guidelines. Then to minimize the transaction risk and the overall risk to the banking system, certain checks and balances are being built into the system. So these digital banking companies, they should have fraud detection systems that are put in place. They should have systems to monitor any unusual transactions, especially those involving money laundering, right? So there should be fraud detection system, unusual transaction monitoring system. There should be a overall surveillance maintained by these digital banking firms to ensure that all the rules are complied with. So these norms are being made mandatory. And digital banking services, they can't flood you with ads from third party products and services, because this can be misleading. Because there could be a parent company which owns a digital banking arm, and they might use the banking platform to target you with ads and advertisements trying to sell other products and services. So this is prohibited by the RBI. Apart from few exceptions, such ads from other third parties is completely prohibited. They can't give you predatory loans. Predatory loans is completely banned under the new guidelines. So such directions are brought out, and they have to be followed by the banking sector, that is the digital banking services. Now, coming to the prelim section, we have 6 articles today, and let's go through them one by one. The NISAR satellite project is in the news. NISAR stands for NASA ISRO Synthetic Aperture Radar Satellite, a very ambitious joint collaboration between NASA and India's ISRO. It's a Earth observation satellite equipped with one of the most advanced synthetic aperture radar. See, your regular Earth observation satellites are usually equipped with optical cameras, but images through optical cameras are sometimes distorted. They are not effective in capturing high resolution images at night time or when there is cloud cover. Whereas the synthetic aperture radar, it can operate during day and night. It can give you high resolution pictures even when there is cloud cover, irrespective of the weather conditions. So it's of great use uh, in various applications, from disaster management to climate studies, for agriculture, for resource mapping, for urban planning. This is primarily a civilian satellite meant only for civilian purposes. But the same technology can be used for military purposes, for surveillance, for border patrolling and monitoring, for monitoring enemies' activities across the border. Right? It can be used for military purposes. But the NISAR project is purely for civilian purposes. This joint venture of NASA and ISRO is only for civilian applications. So, according to this report, the NISAR satellite, which was launched in July, it has entered the science phase of the project. Now, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by satellite entering the science phase of the mission? See, in any mission, there are different phases involved. First, you have the launch phase, when the mission is launched from the ground. Then comes deployment, where you place the spacecraft or the payload into the right designated orbit, and you deploy the radars, the antennas, the solar panels, carry out all the checks to see whether the system is fully functional. So that is deployment. Then comes the required maneuvers and the final commissioning of the satellite, where it will start transmitting data. It will start the two-way communication. And once all these checks are performed, finally comes the last phase, the science phase, which is the primary objective of a spacecraft. The actual mission will begin from now. So NISAR has entered the science phase, meaning its launch is done, deployment is done, commissioning is done. All the checks are done. It is in the designated orbit. All the deployments are done of its solar panels and radars and antennas. It has very healthy communication with the ground stations. Everything is checked. Now it will start the science phase, meaning it will start capturing high resolution pictures. And the data would be used for analysis, for remote sensing, and for the civilian applications as mentioned. So NISAR is entering the science phase, meaning the satellite is now fully functional and operational. and it has a mission life of 5 years. It is expected to be functional for 5 years. The next article, Sri Lanka has been hit by a devastating cyclone. Cyclone Ditwah has caused large scale devastation, particularly on the west coast of Sri Lanka, even capital Colombo, on the outskirts, the suburbs of Colombo, the northern, northwestern, and northeastern parts of Sri Lanka have taken a massive hit, and more than 100 people have already been killed. And now this cyclone is passing through the Gulf of Mannar, the Park Strait region, and moving towards India's east coast. So Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, they're already on high alert, expecting the passage of Cyclone Ditwa, which might possibly affect India's coastline and bring torrential rains to India as well. It has already brought heavy torrential rains in Sri Lanka for more than 2 days, causing widespread destruction of life, property, and infrastructure. More than 100 people have been killed. Sri Lanka has faced the full brunt of the cyclone, and it is struggling to cope with the after effects of the disaster. Now, this is where India steps in. India has a policy called the neighborhood first policy, meaning we give utmost priority to our immediate neighbors, and Sri Lanka is a neighboring country. Then India has a policy towards Indian Ocean region called the Mahasagar Doctrine, which was previously the Sagar Doctrine, security and growth for all in the region. So recently, when PM Modi visited Mauritius, Sagar Doctrine was upgraded to Mahasagar Doctrine, mutual and holistic advancement for security and growth for all in the region. So, under the doctrine, India promises to be the net security provider in the Indian Ocean. India will assist any country in the Indian Ocean when they face an economic crisis or a natural disaster or a security crisis, be it a terrorist attack or a cyclone or a tsunami or an economic crisis or a natural calamity, any disaster, any crisis faced by small countries, India will be the first responder. This is a commitment that we have made to our neighbors and to the entire Indian Ocean region. So, as per the promise, India has delivered. India has launched Operation Sagar Bandhu. Indian Navy has dispatched the indigenous aircraft carrier INS Vikrant and the frontline warship INS Udaygiri with all the relief material to provide aid and assistance and medical supplies to Sri Lanka to help cope with the impact of Cyclone Ditwa. So, India is a pioneer in HADR support in providing humanitarian assistance and disaster relief. We do this with all the global south countries, from Vietnam to Mozambique, from Indonesia to Oman. Multiple countries receive this support from India whenever they face a disaster, especially across the Indian Ocean region. Is that clear? In fact, Sri Lanka requested the presence of INS Vikrant as they needed helicopter-borne search and rescue operations to be carried out. So, accordingly, India has deployed its indigenous aircraft carrier off the coast of Sri Lanka. They were already taking part in the international fleet review. So, these Indian vessels have been repositioned and they are assisting Sri Lanka right now to cope with the impact of Cyclone Ditwa. So, please note down the name of this operation, Operation Sagar Bandhu. Coming to the next topic, Russian President Vladimir Putin will be in India by the first week of December, 4th and 5th of December. The high profile visit of Putin to India is going to take place. So, in the run up to the visit of the Russian president, the two defense ministers are going to meet and they will take stock of the defense relationship between the two countries. So, during this discussion, two important weapon platforms are going to be discussed. One is the S-400, the other is the S-500. The S-400, also known by its NATO codename Triumph, it's one of the most advanced air defense systems in the world. India had ordered 5 units of the S-400s, which has a range of 400 to 500 kilometers to intercept any incoming threat, including ballistic missiles, fighter jets, aircrafts, etc. And we all saw the incredible role of the S-400 air defense systems during Operation Sindhu. India has received the delivery of 3 of these units and India has deployed them along the borders with Pakistan and as well as with China. So during Operation Sindoor, couple of these S-400 units were very active, shielding India's airspace. And they even registered one of the longest kill by a air defense system. A Pakistani AWACS plane, most likely flying near the Afghan border, which was more than 350, 400 kilometers away from the Indian border, was precisely taken down by India's S-400 during Operation Sindoor. This is the longest recorded air kill by an air defense system ever in the history of conflict. So this has proven the credibility of the S-400 systems. And the Indian name for the air defense system is Sudarshan Chakra. So now India has launched a very ambitious air defense program called Mission Sudarshan Chakra to set up credible air defense for critical locations and strategic locations, for major cities, for important government buildings, public sector units, and critical strategic locations. They'll be safeguarded through Mission Sudarshan Chakra, which is an upcoming air defense shield of India. Now, there are reports that India is also considering to buy the S-500, and we still have 2 units of S-400 pending from Russia. I told you, right? We have ordered 5 units. We have only received the delivery of 3 units, which have been deployed already. So the delivery of 2 more units is pending. Russia has not been able to deliver them because of the ongoing war with Ukraine. And there has been a delay from the Russian side. But Russia has promised that by 2026 and 2027, over the next 2 years, the remaining 2 units of S-400 will be delivered. And India is also considering the more advanced variant, S-500. This is being proposed. The S-500 can easily take down a ballistic missile in the range of 600 kilometers and other airborne targets in a range of 400 kilometers. It's considered to be more sophisticated than the S-400 with a larger range of interception. So India is considering the procurement of S-500 as well from Russia in the future. So these issues are likely to be discussed at the defense ministers meeting. Next, topic number 8. India has sealed a deal with United States for the repair and refurbishment and maintenance of the MH-60 Romeo Seahawk helicopters. The MH-60 Romeo Seahawks, manufactured by Sikorsky, is one of the well-known naval helicopters, and it is known for its anti-submarine warfare capabilities. It's known as a submarine hunter in the US Navy. It's also known for its maritime surveillance capabilities. It can help in patrolling your EEZ to look out for any hostile threats and mainly detect enemy submarines underwater and even launch countermeasures against enemy submarines. So India has procured around 24 Seahawk helicopters in a deal with the United States. And now we are signing a repair maintenance agreement, which will cost India around 7,995 crores. So that the American defense manufacturer will continue to provide the spares and the components that are needed to repair and maintain the MH-60 Romeo Seahawk helicopters. Is that clear? It's like when you buy a new car or an electronic appliance, the manufacturer will try to sell you 5-year additional warranty, right? You often hesitate to buy that. Sometimes in cases of our cars and appliances, the warranty goes waste because we never avail the services. We forget that we had taken such extended warranty. But with critical defense platforms, you need such extended contracts, or else repair maintenance will become super expensive. So India is entering into this deal with the US so that the repair maintenance of Seahawk helicopters would be taken care of for the next 5 years. The next topic, topic number 9, the Samudrayaan mission, which is coming up, is facing a major hurdle. And as a result, the mission is going to be delayed. See, the National Institute of Ocean Technology is preparing for India's first deep sea mission. Very few countries have the capability for a deep sea dive. Countries like US, China, Japan, they have proven their capabilities. So India is also having its own indigenous program, the Samudrayaan, and we have developed a submersible vessel, Matsya 6000. The National Institute of Ocean Technology, based out of Chennai, it has developed a simulator using a steel hull for testing the technology and preparing for the eventual mission. In the actual mission, Matsya 6000 would be made up of titanium alloy. The entire outside hull, the spherical hull you can see here, would be made of titanium. It is ISRO which is manufacturing it. ISRO is producing two titanium spherical hulls, which will be used by NIOT for the actual Samudrayaan mission. But in preparation for the mission, the test which is taking place, for that a simulator has been developed, a steel hull has been created. But to even start the testing at 500-meter depth, 1000-meter depth, you need a certain material which provides buoyancy to the metal hull, which helps it in keeping it afloat. This is known as the syntactic foam. It's a specialized material which India is looking to procure from France. So syntactic foam is what will add buoyancy to the hull, helps it keep afloat. So right now, France has produced the foam required for this mission. It is being tested in Norway, but there has been a delay in its production and testing in France and Norway. So it will be delivered maybe by the end of the year, and it will take few more months for the foam to be fitted onto Matsya 6000, the steel submersible, for carrying out the basic test, the initial test at 500-meter depth. If everything goes according to plan, then the same syntactic foam will be removed and it will be put on the titanium hull which ISRO is building for the mission, thus completing the indigenous project. And then the mission will begin, the Samudrayaan mission, where three Indian uh, divers are expected to be a part of this mission for a deep sea dive up to 6,000 meters, where they will try to reach the seabed and collect samples from the seafloor. Because, as you know, the seabed is rich with resources. It is said to be blessed with hydrocarbon reserves, polymetallic nodules, even critical strategic minerals and rare earths. So India is also exploring the opportunity for deep sea mining, and we are competing here with the likes of US, China, and Japan. So project has been delayed, but maybe next year India will launch the test using the steel hull once we receive the foam from France, and then maybe by 2027 the actual mission might be taken up. Coming to the last article, Indian Navy will be conducting the International Fleet Review next year at Vishakhapatnam. See, a fleet review is where the President of India is expected to take the guard of honor and review the entire fleet. It's like Republic Day celebration essentially, where a fleet passes through in front of the president. President takes the guard of honor. Similarly, naval fleets are displayed in the sea. Naval vessels, naval assets are displayed in front of the president, and we invite many foreign navies as well as part of our diplomatic ties and close security defense relations with friendly navies. Many foreign navies are invited for the International Fleet Review. The last time India hosted the International Fleet Review was in 2001, when India marked the 50th anniversary of the Republic. So now, as we mark the 75th anniversary, India is again hosting the International Fleet Review. Many foreign navies will be invited, and it's going to be a high profile diplomatic and military event. India will also be hosting the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium that we started in 2008. It's an Indian initiative, a naval conclave where we bring top naval chiefs and top naval commanders from across the world, from friendly navies, to discuss important maritime security issues. So, India will be hosting the Indian Ocean Naval Symposium next year, along with the International Fleet Review. So, please make a note of this. India is really stepping up its maritime security role in the Indo Pacific. We are involved in multiple military exercises that are mentioned in the article. Exercises like Milan, Malabar, Konkan, Korpat. All these military exercises are named over here. So just take a look and read about them. And also, please note, India is strengthening its maritime capabilities. We have been donating naval vessels and aircraft and ships to other countries. We have donated a submarine to Myanmar. We have donated a corvette vessel to Vietnam. We have donated fast attack craft to Maldives, Mauritius, and Mozambique. India has recently set up a maritime rescue coordination center in Sri Lanka to help ships in distress and to rescue those who are trapped in the sea. So, India's presence across the maritime theater is growing in the Indo Pacific, and it counters China's presence in the Indo Pacific. On this note, I bring the discussion to an end. I hope all the topics are clearly understood. If you like the session, do press the like button and let's meet tomorrow. Till then, take care. Thanks for watching.